He was born into light and privilege and yet lived his whole life in darkness. The millionaire's son grew up surrounded by marble halls and whispered limits. Doctors called it a congenital blindness and said the world his eyes could not see was written in shadows for good. His father circled him with experts in care, investing fortunes in therapies and machines that promised miracles. Still, the son learned to map the world by touch and by sound, by the cadence of footsteps in the corridor and the way afternoon sun warmed a particular windowsill. He learned to laugh without looking at faces and to recognize the house by the smell of lemon oil on polished floors. He carried a calm the nurses mistook for acceptance. Years passed. The son watched other boys learn to ride bikes by the sound of tires and the rush of the wind. He learned to ride in a coach seat, guided by patient hands. He learned to read in Braille with a hunger that surprised everyone. His mind lit up with books that spoke in raised dots and Braille balconies of adventure. He became curious in the way of someone who had been denied the usual map of the world. He asked questions that rolled like pebbles into deep pools and found echoes that did not answer. One winter evening, a messenger arrived at the mansion with a parcel no one would have expected. It was small and wrapped in plain paper that had been handled 1,000 times. Inside was a bottle no larger than his palm, sealed with a wax that had the smell of rain on dry earth. Affixed to the bottle was a note written in a tidy hand. It said only this, for the one who has never seen the color of dawn. No signature, no return address. Nobody wanted the bottle in the house. Servants nodded, the doctor frowned. The father, who had fought courtrooms and markets and won, decided such mysteries were better locked away. But the son kept his hand on the glass when no one was looking. It was warm then, oddly warm, as if it had soaked up some human breath on a distant road. He took it to his room. He set it on the bedside table and sat with it, as if it were a small, sleeping animal. That night he dreamed in a way he had never dreamed before. He dreamt of light that did not sting but unfolded, like a silken sheet across a field. He dreamt of a hand guiding him to a shoreline, and he heard the sea for the first time not only in his ears but in places inside him that recorded images. He woke with his heart thudding like a bird against the cage of his ribs. The bottle sat where he had left it, patient and unassuming. He could not explain why, but he uncapped it. The liquid inside moved like liquid moonlight. It had a soft viscosity that remembered everything it touched. It smelled of places he could not name, of cedar and old stories and a sweetness like the last slice of summer. He lifted the bottle to his lips as if obeying a long-forgotten promise. The first sip tasted of nothing he had ever experienced and everything he could imagine. It slid down his throat and settled somewhere behind his eyes where a small, rebellious warmth began to bloom. At first there was only a whisper. Colors like the names of distant cousins flashed behind his lids. The world did not explode with light. There were no miraculous crescendos. Instead, a slow bloom like a rumor took place. Shapes started to arrange themselves around the edges of his perception. He saw first the outline of his hand, then the slant of curtains, a sliver of the moon framed in the window. It was as if the world had been sketched in charcoal and someone was passing a humid sponge across the paper, coaxing the drawing into being. He staggered to the window and pressed his palm against the glass. Outside the night lay heavy and forgiving. He saw the lane below, the old elm that shivered when the winter wind came. He saw it not as a photograph, but as a living thing, full of small movements and histories. For the first time in his life, he saw his father's face as the father looked back at him in the hallway mirror. He saw the lines he had only known by touch and shame, the tiny tremor at the corner of an eye. The father looked like a man who had been holding his breath for decades. Word of the impossible traveled like lightning. The household erupted. Doctors returned with explanations and instruments that hummed and whirred, but the son felt none of their tests. He could see, and the act of seeing did not feel clinical. It felt like arrival. Streets outside were suddenly full of stories he had never known. The way the lamplight hit the puddles made them look like polished coins. The neighbor's cat perched on a fence and shone like a small statue of patience. People in the city began to queue outside the mansion, bringing flowers, incense, and miracles they had heard about in other towns. Scientists argued about neurology and unknown proteins. Faith leaders declared signs and sermons. The son kept his gaze modest. Seeing had filled him with an embarrassment that tasted faintly of gratitude and fear. He wandered the house with new eyes, cataloging small domestic miracles. A crack in the marble, the handprint in the dust on an old piano, the pale scar his mother had left on a cheek many seasons ago. But the bottle and the night it came remained a mystery. The father wanted to find its maker and pay him in gold. He hired private investigators who dug up villagers and travelers. They came back with folklore and half-truths. A wandering apothecary who sold remedies for sorrow, a hermit who distilled memories into liquids, a traveling monk who traded sight for remembrance. The son listened to all these stories but felt, deep inside, that the liquid had not been a bargain or a theft. It had been an invitation. With sight came other things no one anticipated. Memory returned in colors that were not just mnemonic. Places in his childhood that had always been opaque because he could not see them filled with meaning. He remembered, suddenly as if the past had been waiting for him, a bench by the river where his mother had sat with a woman whose laughter tasted like sugar. He remembered a song hummed in the kitchen that had once loosened the air. He found himself following these memories like a child following a breadcrumb trail. The world responded with a blend of reverence and hunger. Television crews asked for interviews. Scientists proposed studies. The father, who had always been a man of deals, received offers from labs and foundations. They wanted to extract the essence, to manufacture it, to bottle the miracle and distribute it to markets of suffering. He resisted. There was something about the private miracle that he could not hand to strangers even for a province of profit. Then the city changed toward something smaller and stranger. The son began to see beyond sight. The liquid, whatever it had been, had not only opened his eyes, it had tuned him to a quality of attention that turned ordinary encounters into revelations. He watched a blind violinist busk on a corner and saw the way the player's fingers trembled like answering birds. He watched a woman in a bakery tear open a letter and hold it against her chest, and he understood the architecture of her grief. He discovered that seeing was less about the information light brings and more about the way attention needs human life. One afternoon, he walked through a neighborhood that had been a blank patch on the map of his life. He stopped in front of a small clinic where a sign swung in the breeze. Inside sat a girl no older than 12 with one hand pressed to her temple. Her eyes were a pale gray, clouded in a way that suggested they could not change. She smiled when she heard his steps. The staff welcomed him because the house had already become a minor oracle. He sat with the girl. They spoke without speaking at first. He held her hand and told her about the bottle and the way it had tasted of summer and rain and cedar and the hush before a bell's toll. They brought a sample. The girl leaned forward and sipped nothing but water, and the way she laughed afterward made the room tilt like a game piece. He realized he had started something he could not unstart. The city wanted to manufacture miracles into treatments and commodities, to make light that could be sold in ampoules and subscriptions. Already the halls of science framed the question as one of yield and distribution. The son felt a responsibility that had nothing to do with laboratories. He thought about those years he learned to memorize the pattern of the house and the scent of a room and the quiet geometry of affection. He thought about a world in which sight could be bought by those with money and not given to those with need. His father argued that development and research could save countless lives. But the son remembered the note on the bottle, the plain paper and gentle handwriting. For the one who has never seen the color of dawn. He decided to do something the world did not expect. He opened a small clinic in a neighborhood that had been ignored for generations, not with machines and private jets, but with quiet rooms and listening chairs. He invited doctors and musicians and cooks and librarians. The clinic would not sell the liquid to the highest bidder. It would not rush to patent the recipe. Instead, it would ask questions, sit with people, and learn the shape of their needs. It would be a place where anyone could be seen in return. As the clinic grew, so did the rumors. Some said the son had been gullible, others called him visionary. The bottle's origin remained shrouded. Some evenings he would place the empty bottle on the shelf and touch the wax just to feel the faint warmth of the world it had once held. People came from far and near. Some returned with tears and stories of small recoveries. Others left disappointed and silent, mysteries unchanged. Years later, in a quiet season, the son stood by the river and watched the slow confession of light on the water. He no longer thought about the miracle as a commodity or a secret to be guarded. He thought about it as a hinge, a seam where one life opened into another. He had seen things that money could not buy, and he had learned to listen. The city he loved held its breath and exhaled in 1,000 small ways. One evening, a traveler arrived at the clinic with a bundle and a face carved by wind and sun. He was old enough to have lived many winters and young enough to be patient with questions. He confessed he had once been a keeper of small remedies, the sort of tradesman who knelt in markets and measured herbs and spoons. He said he had found a place where memories pooled like streams, and he had distilled a small portion into something that could be shared. He did not claim to have cured the world. He said simply that sometimes sight is a gift and sometimes it is a responsibility. The sun looked at the man and saw in the set of his shoulders the weight of many roads. He took the man's hand and thanked him softly. He no longer desired the bottle for himself. He saw that the impossible had already done what it needed to do. It had given him a way to see himself and others, not as objects to be fixed, but as people to be known. In the years that followed, the son continued to walk the city with his careful eyes. He married a woman who loved clockwork shops and old maps. Together, they taught children how to read the world in different keys. When he grew old, the son did not fear the dark. He had learned that sight could come in a bottle and also in a look, in the way a neighbor learned your habits, in the tenderness of a hand on the small of your back. The bottle remained on a shelf in the clinic, a humble relic. People came and left, seeking different miracles. The son understood finally that the impossible had not been a single event, but a string of small acts that rewired the world in gentle increments. When his father passed, the son stood at the foot of his bed and recognized the face he'd touched in the mirror all those years ago. He saw, without cavil, the quiet truth of a life that had loved and feared and finally let go. He poured a small glass of water and carried it to the windowsill where the sun leaned early and forgiving. He raised the glass to catch the light and thought of dust motes and hymns and telephone wires and the long, patient work of seeing. He did not need the bottle to remember the impossible. He had learned that miracles arrive wrapped in ordinary paper and that a simple invitation can change everything. The sun watched the city wake up and smiled. The color of dawn was not a single shade. It was a ledger of small mercies that added up until the whole world glowed.